So today we're joined in the studio by Jens Voigt. Jens is back in Wisconsin to ride across the state of Wisconsin. This is the fifth time, and it's a one-day event. This year, a little bit longer, new course, 225 miles. And we're really happy that, Jens, you're here and that you have some time to join us in the studio. We want to talk really about some stories that perhaps people don't know about you. I think your career on the bike is well documented, but we're actually going to go back in time and talk about some of your earliest experiences with sport and with cycling. And maybe even very specifically, if we go way back in time, we want to understand a little bit more about Germany at the time when you were a child. There are expressions or terms that are in the history books today about a wall, or even about this idea of an iron curtain. So my first question is, how did you first understand what that wall was? How was it explained to you as a child?
Well, to start very, very early, I was born and raised until at the age of 14 in a town where we could see every morning from the breakfast table of the kitchen, we could see the wall, we could see the border. I lived right at the inner German border, and my first memories were there were two lines of fences, and then I saw them building the wall, so a third line of fences. Some moments or sometime they had dogs in between them on like a big like steel wire, and each dog would have about 100 yards running space for himself, and then they would have the next dog on the other side. So yeah, I saw it every day. It was part of our life. And since I lived so close to the border, I also saw or heard a few people attempting to run away and escape. And I remember, I think only twice it happened. We had some Russian soldiers in Germany, right? I mean, the Americans and the British were stationed in Western Germany, and the Russians, of course, in Eastern Germany. And when these Russian soldiers tried to escape into the West, they would take their Kalashnikovs with them. So they would shut down the whole region. They would go, no school, please, nobody leaves the house until they would then either they would escape or they would capture them. And capturing normally ended very violently. As far as I remember, these two times, they lost their lives, basically.
It help us envision how tall was the structure itself. So when you talk about people escaping, they had to go over a pretty formidable barrier.
Yes, well, the first old fence was about 2 meters. That would be a little less than 7 feet. The second fence was with barbed wire on the top, so that were probably about 8 feet or 9 feet, yeah, I would say. No, 3 meters, 10 feet, precisely, 3 meters, 10 feet, yeah. And the wall was, I think, another 2 feet higher than that. So it was pretty tough to actually successfully make an attempt. I remember sometimes training along these the wall on the road on my bike. I just, out of like a challenging point, I tried to make a plan of how and where I would escape. But just something like to occupy your mind during hours on the bike. So yeah, the wall was always there, and I believe probably at the age of 10, everybody was aware of the fact that they will shoot. It's trying to run the country, or defect, is that the word?
Mm-hmm, yes.
Would be one of the biggest crimes you could commit. And if you successfully make it, you put everybody back home in really a lot of trouble. All your friends, whatever, your school class, your colleagues at work, your family, they would all go and disappear for months for interrogation. Because you would say, how much did you know? Why didn't you follow? Why didn't you tell us if you know something? So everybody would go for months, and some people they would keep longer, try to break them, if they feel they knew something about it. So yeah, it was a big decision to make to try to run the country. On the other side, the winner writes history. And on our side of the wall, the Russians won the war, and we had their version. So our version was, the wall was there to protect us from you guys, to keep you out of our wonderful country. To imperialism, that was the word we used for all of the Western countries, that they don't come and whatever, buy and steal and take our stuff away. So in our version, the Iron Curtain or the wall was there to protect us from the mean outside world.
Your family had a direct connection, your father. Talk about that.
Well, Dad, he served the army in Berlin right about the time when we were building the wall, and in the 60s. And so see what they did in East Germany, because they never trusted their own people, right? So my dad lived up north. He got stationed in the middle of Germany, so he wouldn't have any connections, or he wouldn't know how to run the country or how to run away, because they figured, they were paranoid. Our East German government, they were paranoid about their own people, to say the least. So he served army in Berlin, around Berlin. And every morning they would get a new partner, so that you could never become friends or never trust each other, because you never knew what the other person thinks. And so normally it would be somebody from the south. So they would meet in the middle of the country, one young boy, 18 years old, from the north, one young boy from the south. They would meet the first and probably the last time in their army time. They would meet, and then they had to patrol the border. So now each of them carries a loaded weapon, and they not only have to look at any outside whatever spy or agency tried to run into our country, they also had to look for people they would run away. And the worst was, Dad told me the most nerve-wracking was, your partner carries a gun as well. If he wants to run, the safest way that he could run is to shoot you first. So Dad told me every morning he would go, hey, please, whatever you do, don't shoot me in the back. Knock me over or whatever, shoot me in my leg, but just please don't kill me if you want to run, right? Because even if you promised the other guy, if you want to run, I wouldn't shoot. How would he know you wouldn't shoot, right? So we had cases like that where the patrol partners would fire on each other. It was
Incredible.
a terrible time, yeah.
So go forward to the time when the change occurred and the wall was coming down. What was your first opportunity to cross that line?
At the age of 13, I had to go through a series of tests with cycling to qualify for the sports school system we had in East Germany. And so I lived in Berlin, lived at the dorms at the sports school. And I was just 18. And I had, I didn't even know of it, because I had the radio switched off, TV switched off, and I was just doing my homework. It was my last year high school, and I prepared something for school. So I was sitting at the dorms. And then my friends came up and said, hey, they were a little older, they were already married. And I said, hey, why don't we come and go to Western Berlin? I'm like, are you crazy? They're going to shoot us. What's in your mind? And he said, no, the border is open. The wall is open. And then I switched on TV, and of course it was on all the channels. And then we went across to Western Berlin. It was eye-opening, but it was also frightening. It was also, imagine like tomorrow they would say, hey, the border between Mexico and the US is open. Your country is going to get united. Imagine how the Mexicans would feel. They would go, I like to visit the US, but being part of the country now, and it was a different system. Everything was different, right? And East Germans, or the communist system, they did a pretty good job in brainwashing. Even though I lived close enough to the border, I could receive Western TV. I knew some of the West, but not all. So it was pretty exciting times. And then don't forget, in the Eastern Bloc, we had two revolutions like that before, 56 in Hungary, and I believe in the early 70s in Czechoslovakia. And both times the Russians came in, shot 1,000 people, and closed the border again. So every morning from that day on, you would check radio, TV, and newspaper if the Russians are there, and if they close the border again, because we were still a Russian, not occupied, but we didn't have the right to decide for ourselves. Mr. Gorbachev, God bless him, he had to sign papers and release us out of his whatever responsibility or power or being part of the East German bloc. And so every morning you would check the news if the border is still open and what happens. And then after a month or two, you figured, okay, I think we're fairly safe. I don't think they can shut the border now anymore. And then you start to think, okay, what happens? Are we going to have two Germanys existing next to each other? We're going to get reunited? Which currency we going to take? Which political system? Who is going to be president or whatever, prime minister of or chancellor in case of Germany? Who is going to be chancellor? Which party is going to run the show? So there was a lot of open questions every day, basically, coming up. And then we had unification. And I must say, the opening of the border or the fall of the wall came for me at the perfect timing. I had my education, my physical training, everything done in East Germany, and now I had a chance to actually make a living out of it, to make a career with that. And see what happened to my parents. First thing, both lost their jobs because in East Germany, part of the political system was nobody is unemployed. So even if they have too many people, nobody would get fired. Right? We had also only one company producing one things, like Diamant, the part of the Trek family. There was the only bike factory in entire East Germany. We had one for radios, one for TVs, whatever, one for knives and forks, and one for one for motorbikes. And so there was no competition, no commercials. And they didn't need to develop their products because they were the only ones making them. So even if it's a medium quality product, people would still kill to get it because we had a shortage of everything. So once then free enterprise came in and the capitalist system, they had to fire a lot of people because they were, of course, having way too many people working. So my parents lost their job. So now see, if you're now gonna sit down with the Voigt family and you ask my parents, do you want the wall back up? My parents would hesitate for a second or two. They would for sure say, no, we don't want the wall back up. But they would hesitate because we were still younger kids when it happened. They felt responsible for us. They both lost their jobs. So they felt, oh, how can I support food and shelter to my family without a job? So they were stressed about it. Me, I wouldn't hesitate for a split second. I would go, man, the best thing ever. Give me a chance to meet my wife because she's from Western Germany. Mm-hmm. We had the kids, so my life is just perfect with the wall coming down. And then if you ask the next generation, my children would go, which wall? Did Stalin build the wall or Hitler? They wouldn't even know about it anymore because they are obviously all born after the wall came down because I met my wife from Western Berlin after the wall came down. So see, the three generations. My parents, yes, life is better, but they would hesitate for a moment. I wouldn't hesitate for a second. Hell no. And my kids would go, I don't know anything about it. And that's good. You know, the country is really growing together.
So you talked about Western Berlin as the first time into that area. When did you first go beyond, out of Germany?
Oh, that's a good question. That is a good question. So I still had to finish my school, my high school. I believe I joined then the country got united, and then I joined the national team, the German national team. I believe it must have been the Tour of Normandy, amateur race in France. I think France was the first time I actually left out, like the first country I saw outside Germany. And first time I actually did hear another language.
Wow. And you certainly continued to return there quite frequently.
Yes, actually, I did. Yes, many times. I had also my first broken collarbone in France.
In France.
Okay. And they had a surgery right there, like whatever, the next morning after the crash. And then by the end of the race, the German national team came by, picked me up, and we drove back home. Because back in the days, you drove everywhere. You wouldn't fly anywhere. You would sit in your car and drive for like a day to go to the next bike race.
Wow. So let's go back and talk about the early time in the sport. At that time, there was a series of tests where you would learn about your strengths and some recommendations would be provided about sports that would work for you. Talk about those early experiences with the results, but also some of the testing.
Well, we had a university which was specialized in school and physical education in Leipzig. And we had like a central system there, so all data from basically all kids in Eastern Germany, how fast they would run, whatever, the 50 meters, the 100 meters, the 3 kilometers, all these data would be kept and sent there, and then they would filter through to see which kids are worth looking at. And then later, once I started to do cycling, we had more specific tests. They would, for example, they had a smart little formula. They would measure the size of the bones of your wrist, and by that they could determine how tall you're gonna be. And they looked at the results you do in your sport, and then they would give you recommendations. For example, in my case, they said I would be 100% adapted for cycling or middle to long distance running. That would have been me. Other kids would have more quick muscles, so they would go, no, he's better as a sprinter, or he's better in like whatever other sports, right? I was always like a slimmer frame, so I was never really good in handball, because you got to be pretty tough to play handball or other sports like that. So they actually give some proper advice to parents and the kids which sport the kid would be good at. And yeah, in my case, I ended up with cycling.
So was that a choice that you made of choosing that sport as opposed to running?
Yes. In my little hometown, we had volleyball, which I never liked too much to play myself. We did track and field. I did that. I had a few good results, a few wins in running. But then once I had a argue or whatever, a fight with the coach, we trained for the long jump. And I really believe it's fair to say I'm not a quitter. If there's one thing you cannot accuse me of, is not trying hard enough. I think that's one of my qualities. I always give it all I have. And I didn't jump far enough in his eyes. He said, you didn't try hard enough. You were not serious about it. And he made me run penalty laps. And I never came back after that. I said, F this. I give everything I had, and you don't believe me, and you make me run punishment laps, around the track. And I never came back. And at that point, the local cycling team presented themselves in front of the school, said, hey, whoever signs up this afternoon for our little local cycling team gets a brand new bike. And again, to close the circle of life, it was a Diamant bike. My first bike was a Diamant bike at the age of, I was still 9 years old. And that's why I'm so glad that Trek kept this company alive and purchased or took over the company after the wall came down, so they wouldn't disappear. Now I made an effort that my kids ride Diamant bikes as well. See, I like the idea of the whole circle is closing.
That.
I had a Diamant bike, my kids have a Diamant bike. And well, back in the days, I guess my parents were what you call working class, so we didn't have a car in the family, right? And you're 9 years old, just about turning 10 years old, and somebody offers you a free bike, and you don't have a car in the family. And looking back at it, I believe that bike was the first item in my life that was only for me, that was not passed on from my brother, or I wouldn't have to pass it down to my sister. So it was really the only bigger item just for myself. And well, I wouldn't call it life-changing, but it was quite a dramatic improvement in my life. It just doubled my range of activities, and it made me independent. So whenever people ask me about bikes, one of the first words are freedom, self-sufficient, independence. These are the first words or connections I have when we talk about bikes.